writing poems when I was very young. I think I started writing poems when I was 8 or 9. I continued writing through my early teen years. And so I was already, it was always how this form of art that I was most interested in making. It's very hard to enter into other people's pain. You can witness it, but you can't experience it. I don't know what almost any forms of pain feel like, whether that's physical or emotional pain. What I can do is I can describe, from the position of the spectator, what that looks like to me. I can imagine, I can try to put myself into someone else's shoes, but I always wonder how much the boundaries of the self can be passed over in that way. At some point, everything that you do, everything that you think is grounded in your own experience. I mean, I think America is a nation of immigrants. Everyone here, except for the indigenous people, are immigrants. Everyone here has come to the English language through some story. There are very few people of pure English blood. There are very few even English people of pure English blood. So, everyone comes to this country and they claim a particular tradition of writing in English. Some people think that they are more or less entitled to claim English as a language in which they can work, but that's often just racist. I'm someone, I grew up speaking English. English is my first language. And no one ever told me I wasn't allowed to write poetry, and I would dispute them strongly if they claimed that I was, just based on my race and what I look like. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard for me to understand what is meant by the term Asian wisdom. I mean, parts of Turkey are parts of Asia. I have no access to that. I have no access to China. I have no access to Pakistan. I think that every family grows up with a cultural tradition. My family, brought certain influence certainly from Korea, but, I also grew up in Texas. You might as well say that I have Texan wisdom in my poems. I don't know what is or what, it's very hard to disentangle your personality from your culture. I could ask you, how is your upbringing responsible for what you think? It's not a question that you can answer in terms of percentages, or even in terms of what parts of you are made up of culture and what parts of you are yourself. Ezra Pound is an interesting figure. Ezra Pound was very attracted to the idea of China before he could read Chinese. He was attracted to what he thought Chinese poems sounded like, and he couldn't read Chinese, and he was accessing these, classical Chinese poems through very terrible translations for the most part. And he kind of used, Chinese poetry and the idea of Chinese poetry as almost an advertisement for his style of modernism, which was very minimalist, very lacking in transitions and connections, which was a curation of very small details. And lots of actual Chinese people say that he got it wrong, that he had actually very little understanding of the Chinese language and Chinese literature, and that he was just imposing on them kind of what he wanted to make of them. So there's a lot of controversy around Ezra Pound, but in some sense, I am coming out of that tradition of modernism. Those were the poems that I read growing up, even as, and you always come out of a tradition that is compromised. The American tradition is also based on, cultural appropriation, imperialism, colonialism. And it's very hard to separate those influences from where you are. I mean, I was reading a quote yesterday that no one is pure in a colonized world. You can't say, oh, I'm going to live my life free from these colonizing influences. It's just not possible. You would not be able to breathe anything. You would not be able to eat anything or think anything or read anything. And what you have to do is figure out how you are going to try to form a self under those conditions. I mean, I don't know what I'm not sure about, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the rumor and the story to which you're referring, but I can talk about the question, why poetry? Poetry is a form of language that is self-conscious of its own song-like qualities. Originally, when poetry developed, it was as a aid to memory. Like, you would be more likely to recognize language that was beautiful in certain ways, that was patterned in certain ways, that had certain syllabic patterns, that had rhyme, that had sonic resonance of various kinds. And that was a way of making something beautiful out of the everyday, out of the language that you use as a tool. You could also make something beautiful and memorable out of, what is free to everyone, right? The words that we speak. I mean, I don't think that they're the only things that remain. Certainly we have stories that remain from various traditions. There aren't very many Korean poems that have been passed down. There are quite a lot of Korean folk tales that have been passed down. There's quite a lot of Korean artwork of various kinds. There are stone carvings, is jewelry, there are various artifacts. So I don't know, I kind of don't really agree with the premise that architecture and poetry are the only things that get passed down. Food gets passed down, religion gets passed down. I do think that architecture and poetry are both things that are patterned, but that transform in various ways. I mean, there are things that have certain structures that make some things more desirable than others, but you see those patterns change. The building that you're living in is very different from the buildings that would have existed 2,000 years ago in the same place. Advocacy is about making an argument for a certain reason in a certain place and time, and poetry is and often those reasons are very urgent. There's a lot of urgent necessities in the world as we look around right now. Poetry is about trying to is not about making an argument. Oftentimes it's about making an observation. It is about making something that you hope will last beyond the present moment. So it's really just two different kinds of language. I can't say, I think in some ways it was easier to have those two different modes of writing. I think that, I knew that if I wanted to change something immediately, then the way in which I should go about that was as a lawyer, and I should do something on the legal side. And if I knew that if I wanted to make a more detached observation, then I could write a poem. I think where people get frustrated is where they try to use the wrong tool. And I think of both of those as tools. I think poets get a little too used to just sitting in their rooms and writing things and expecting change to happen rather than going out into the street and using their bodies and using their voices, right? Well, if it's subconscious, I wouldn't know whether it was or not. I write about the sky because I live on the 17th floor. The sky is what I see when I look out my windows, and it's what I notice and what changes from day to day. And I like looking at it. I'm not quite sure why. I don't think I said I wasn't a nature person. I said I wasn't a nature poet, I'm not naturally a nature poet, but I do try to observe things. I've been trying to get out into nature more. It helps having a little son, which I have, and, going out into nature with him. I mean, I don't know I do think that there are things that haven't been said. I think that there are ideas that haven't been had. And I think that often it's not the content of what you say, but the way you say it that changes. A lot of people can paint a picture of the same person. But the way that they paint it is what makes it new, what makes it different, right? I'm not sure about that. I mean, pens and paper were a technology that didn't exist when poetry was first invented. It seems to have survived that. Printing was a technology that did not exist before and it seems to have survived that. I think that, when new technologies come, poetry takes account of it. Sometimes it works with it. Like, the fact of poetry being visible on the page in written language is a technological innovation. Poets work with that so that, they lay things out differently on the page. They put things into stanzas that would not previously have been into stanzas. They play with their line lengths. They play with the way the lines look on the page. And I see no reason that future technological innovation should not be taken into account. Now, if what you're saying by AI monopolizing the human imagination, like, if robots take over the world, then, everything is done, not just poetry. But I'll worry about that when I think it's about to happen.